So I wanted to ask, why do you think that is, and what's the best way to move forward, I guess, when there is such a fundamental skepticism among a huge, member of a huge proportion of our electorate and Congress who obviously doubt that consensus. So David.
Well, as to why it is, maybe Steve will have more insight than I do inside the mind of the conservative movement. I just think the issue has become incredibly polarized, and more or less whatever liberals believe or want to do, conservatives are going to disbelieve and not want to do. That seems to be the rule in politics these days. As to how to deal with this, I actually differ, I think, from a lot of people in the energy world on this. On my side of the aisle, talking about climate change has become so controversial and polarized, people should just drop it and start talking about green jobs or clean energy or economic growth or energy independence. And I certainly agree that we ought to be talking about those things, the many benefits of clean energy. But I think it would be a classic Democratic mistake to run away from climate change because conservatives have rendered it uncomfortable to talk about. If you really believe that climate change presents an existential challenge to our children and grandchildren, and I really do, if you believe something like that, you don't drop it when it becomes politically uncomfortable. And sooner or later, our political system is going to have to address it. And when that time comes, I think they'll turn to the party that has stuck by the courage of its convictions in the meantime. So I'm absolutely in favor of keeping climate in the mix and talking about it forthrightly and honestly, despite the sort of mysticism and irrationalism that's taken over politics generally.
All right, Steve, what do you have to say?
I, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with anything that David's put forward there. As for skeptics on climate science or how bad global warming is, I think the bigger issue here is what the election actually meant and where America's priorities are right now. I'm not going to sit up here and say global warming's not happening or climate change isn't a problem or anything like that. What I would say is just that the elections that happened last week show that the American people are focused right now on jobs in the economy, something they haven't seen any substantive attention on from Congress over the past year and a half, really. And these efforts to push through cap and trade or the EPA trying to regulate carbon dioxide, it's just not where America's priorities are right now. So whether these new members agree or disagree with climate science is in some sense immaterial, because the priorities of Congress should be on growing the economy, getting the economy back to a place where jobs can actually be created.
I see. Now, but does it present sort of a fundamental challenge when those who are climate change skeptics might be so resistant, I guess, to sensing the need for some dramatic change in our energy policy? Is that a possibility? Let me go back to you, Steve, for that question, for that follow-up.
Well, I think that's certainly a possibility. But what I would say is that a lot of what people who are coming into Congress right now, who may or may not be climate skeptics, what they're trying to push forward again is economic growth. And if you want to talk specifically about the energy policy they would favor, they're talking about things that create jobs rather than just relying on platitudes about green jobs or anything else. And there's actually a lot of issues that people could get behind on both sides of the aisle. We'll talk, maybe a little bit later about what we can do with conservation. I think natural gas is a huge opportunity in this country. It's, a relatively clean energy source. It's obviously not perfect. Nothing really is. But there's a huge consensus building around natural gas reserves in the United States, which have just grown substantially even in the past 10 years, and pose an enormous possibility for, creating new jobs, creating new wealth. And yes, if climate science is being challenged, it is going to pose a challenge to people who want to impose new energy taxes and use the EPA to regulate carbon. Ends justify the means. I don't want to get back and forth into that kind of debate. I'm not really interested in that. But again, the focus needs to be on economic growth, and I think what you're going to see them put forward is something that a lot of people in America actually agree with.
David, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, in theory, I want to apologize first for audience members. I have a chest cold, so I'm going to be coughing in your ear quite a bit. Um, in theory, there's plenty of room for bipartisan action on energy that is unrelated to climate change. I mean, in theory, you can see all kinds of ways to progress that don't involve climate change. But I do, you know, I do want to insist that climate change adds an element of urgency and adds an element of urgency to all this, and an element ought to add an element of ambition to our response to all of this. And I think dropping it is a mistake. But you know, I think when we talk about economic growth, I think where Steve and I are going to fundamentally disagree is that right now I see an energy system that is laced with rules and regulations and subsidies that lock in fossil fuel incumbents and protect them from competition and thereby suppress economic growth. They're suppressing the normal action of the free market. I mean, in hundreds and thousands of ways, fossil fuel incumbents are protected from the normal competitive forces of the free market. And so if we want economic growth, I think we should start by evening the playing field, by leveling the playing field.
And that actually leads us perfectly into our next question, which is from Carrington Ward, who asks, well, let me just get this on the screen. I guess, sorry for a second here, I just lost the question.
I saw it briefly.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened to that question. Basically, it had to do with, I mean, how can the free market work, I guess, effectively when political lobbying has such a high return on investment, which kind of taps a little bit into what you were saying, David. I guess another question for you, and then Steve can.
Well, I mean, I would say, and I agree with a lot of environmentalists about this, a lot of Greens, a lot of climate hawks of all stripes, that a genuinely free market in energy would be great. There has never been one, and I think there's unlikely ever to be one, because energy is such an important national priority, and there are so many large constituencies, as the questioner says, in politics, lobbying and jockeying for position. So, but one thing you could do to create more of a free market is start lowering barriers to competition, start lowering barriers to entry, start removing some of this extraordinary level of subsidy we provide to fossil fuel incumbents, start opening the electricity markets, breaking up the monopoly utilities and opening up more competition in electricity markets. There are thousands of policies you can think of that would move us from our current highly rigged system to something at least more closely approximating a free market. And I think, honestly, that the closer you get to a free market, the closer you get to, you know, if we remember the classic characteristics of a free market are low barriers to entry and exit, perfect information, perfect competition. The closer we get to that state of affairs, the more clean energy will surge and succeed. I think it being held down now by politically connected industries who are trying to protect their incumbency.
What do you think? Is that a problem? Is more addressed through campaign finance issues, Steve, or is that, I mean, sort of a legitimate concern regarding the lobbying?
No, I don't want to take the traditional, leftist attack that this all can boil down to the Citizens United Supreme Court case. Yeah. I think what David said about well-connected groups lobbying for their piece of the market or whatever, I'd actually agree with that. And actually, if you look at where the subsidies are going, where the market is actually, where they're trying to actually skew the market, you'll see that renewable energies are getting anywhere between 20 to 50 times as much per megawatt hour produced. So on a per unit of energy produced, renewables are dwarfing fossil fuel production. And there's a reason for that. It's because fossil fuels, for better or incredibly efficient, they provide a lot of energy, they're easy to transport, and they're not intermittent, like solar and wind are. As for having a free market and how to address this problem, one other signal that we got from this election is that all the companies like GE and Siemens that have spent the past year and a half trying to push us toward the Spanish model of 20% unemployment, where we can invest in all these wonderful green jobs and supposedly get all of this, just all these fantastic results that never actually materialize, actually hamstring the economy. They actually start taking the money away, that they were investing in lobbying the government to carve out their own market for themselves, and actually start investing in products that consumers want. Taxpayers and consumers should cheer the elections right now, because there's a clear signal that the attempts to, create that artificial market for themselves, that's over. We're actually going to move towards something where people are, going to create products that people want, rather than a product that we can have the government force other people to buy.
Hey, Marcus, can I respond to one part of that? Can I jump in on just one part of that?
Yeah, keep it short. But yeah.
Sure, I'll keep it short. I just want to point out that this notion that renewables get more subsidies per megawatt produced is an incredibly deceptive way of framing things. The reason it looks like fossil fuels get low per megawatt subsidies is because they're enormous, gigantic industries that have been fully robust and mature for 50 years now, and they're still getting subsidies. So of course, if you average it out over all the power they're producing, the subsidies look small. But the point is, if you have a fully grown, mature industry, why is it still getting subsidies at all? The reason renewable subsidies look large on a per megawatt basis is that they're a tiny, nascent industry, and those are the kinds that traditionally the U.S. has supported with public investment. So I just think the per megawatt way of measuring subsidies is an absurd sort of red herring.
I see. Okay. Well, interesting. And that brings me to also looking at in Washington, what can be accomplished there. What has Obama done right? What has he done wrong in terms of his climate initiative, which obviously is still pending? So, Steve, why don't you answer that one?
Oh, okay. One of the things he did early was providing the first loan guarantee for a nuclear plant in 20 years. I can't remember the exact time frame on that. Looking at nuclear power.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I was just saying it definitely was close to 30 years. I mean, I remember 3 Mile Island.
Yeah, and
froze any initiative when it came to nuclear power. So.
And that's a perfect example of one of the things that's so wrong about our energy policy. We can debate, who gets the bigger subsidies and, how to look at it, aggregate or, per megawatt hour or whatever. But when it comes down to it, you have a lot of regulations that have been in place for 20 or 30 years that have actually hamstrung America's ability to become energy independent.
Over there, Steve.
Modular reactors, a bunch of different innovation that can take place, but it's all going to stop at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And the thing that I wish Obama would have done when he gave that loan guarantee is look at the bigger problem, which isn't necessarily loan guarantees, but sorting out the regulatory mess that is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that keeps nuclear power from being a viable energy source. It's zero carbon emissions. It can provide power 24/7. I don't know any other clean energy source that can do both of those at the same time.
David, how do you feel about that question with Obama? What he's done right or wrong?
Marcus, I got booted out for a second. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, it was basically about going back to Washington. What has Obama done right or wrong when it comes to his energy initiative?
Well, I mean, I think if there's one gigantic flaw in American political commentary and voters' sort of assessments of these things is that there's way too much attention on Barack Obama, the head of the executive branch. It's Congress that makes domestic policy. So Obama can do quite a bit, but ultimately it's Congress who does or does not. So I think if Obama had been in charge, things would be great. But Congress is in the grips of fossil fuel money, and so Obama has set the right direction. Obviously, the stimulus bill was a huge step forward on green energy. I think he's absolutely right to go forward with the EPA. I think he's absolutely right on his decision to start pushing federal procurement in the right direction, to have federal departments start buying more of these clean energies and increasing their efficiency. But ultimately, Obama is just highly, highly constrained. The executive branch is highly constrained in what it can do. So if you're looking for places to place blame, and believe me, I am, Congress is the place to look.
Yeah, interesting. I know this is a question from our audience. What role do small businesses play in America's energy future? And what should the government do, I guess, to help? Obviously, small businesses play a helpful role. So, Dave, how about you? Take that one.
I the thing is, Marcus, that small business has come to play a kind of weird symbolic role in American political discussions. I think generally, when it comes to conservatives, they use small businessman as kind of a code for rich dude. So, I mean, I think I think business generally can play an enormous role in innovation and in spreading these things and making them more socially accepted and all sorts of things. But I would like to see an energy policy that moves away from being a sort of incoherent, inconsistent grab bag of subsidies and tax breaks for individual politically connected industries. And those subsidies and tax breaks are always passed under cover of helping small business. So I just want to return to the notion that I would like to see a level playing field. Nothing could be better for the American economy generally than having a level playing field. But of course, for any given industry, it doesn't want a level playing field. It wants protection from competition. So I just think small business, looking at it through the lens of small business, is kind of a distorting way to look at it. I want rules that apply equally and fairly to all businesses, and so that they can compete fairly.
Is that a distortion, Steve? What do you think?
I bet Steve loves small businesses.
I think I do. They create a lot of jobs in this country. Not recently, unfortunately, but look, economic growth is going to come from small business. Job creation is going to come from small business. And for America's energy future, the best thing we can do as a country, whether it's protecting the environment or getting the right energy sources in place, is to create a strong and powerful economy. We need economic growth, which requires using energy. And small businesses' role in this is several. If we want to talk about protecting the environment, small business can lead a lot on conservation efforts if you want to go that route. There's a lot of efforts at the small business level where they can trim some of the fat of their utility bills and all this other stuff. I would argue the bigger point, though, is look at economic growth and what that does for countries' ability to deal with big problems, whether it's energy policy or solving the national debt or even being able to fund our troops overseas. We have all these different priorities and all these different problems, and if we don't have a strong small business sector, we're not going to have the kind of economic growth that keeps us strong. And one other point I would mention about this is that oil and gas producers, two of the most affordable and reliable sources of energy we have. 67 to 80% of all of our oil and gas in this country comes from independent producers, smaller producers, marginal well producers, which is part of America's small business. So there is a role directly in energy for small business. And again, the bigger point here is we want economic growth. We need a low tax base. We need something that encourages businesses to actually be created here by entrepreneurs, rather than a restrictive environment, like the EPA imposing endless regulations on this through whether it's carbon dioxide or anything else, or a new cap and trade system. This is the kind of uncertainty that's keeping a lot of businesses on the sidelines right now, including small businesses.
Yeah, I had a question. I mean, getting to cap and trade. I mean, basically, a lot of, I think, environmentalists argue that cap and trade is sort of a distraction, or even worse, something that exacerbates the problem. That the real issue is energy conservation. And what are ways that either the government or that in partnership with the free market can encourage people to obviously conserve? I mean, everyone knows Americans are some of the biggest consumers in the world, and that a lot of people argue, as I just said, that the real issue is conservation, and that cap and trade sort of kicks the can down the road. What do you feel about that, David?
Well, first of all, I want to absolutely reject any false dichotomy between putting a price on carbon, which is what cap and trade does, and conservation. Putting a price on carbon will encourage conservation, among other things. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I think we should be very careful to distinguish between conservation, which is using less energy by using less energy services, by turning the heat down, or putting a sweater on, or driving less, and energy efficiency, which is using the same amount of energy services, driving just as much, keeping your house the same temperature with less energy input. And it's energy efficiency, I think, that is the largest, cheapest, most ready-to-hand energy source we have in this country. And in a sane world, in a sane politics, the right and the left would have energy efficiency absolutely at the top of their energy agenda. But I think what you see in politics is, what wins in politics are two things: intensity and money. So that's why you have an energy policy that's composed of battling constituencies who want subsidies for their businesses. What energy efficiency lacks is a concentrated constituency that's passionate about it and that spends money in Washington, D.C. And that's why, despite what ought to be a perfectly bipartisan policy focused on energy efficiency, in fact, you hear virtually nothing about energy efficiency in D.C. And so this is, to me, is what progressives do, is they take the public interest, which is diffuse and weak, and they concentrate it and they give it a voice in Washington. And to me, this ought to be everybody's number one priority in the years going forward, not necessarily at the federal level where nothing is going to happen, but at the state level and even at the city level, the local level, is focus on energy efficiency. It's enormous, it's cheap, saves people money, it reduces emissions. It's the Swiss Army knife of energy policy.
Steve, is that what do you feel about the energy efficiency, I guess, argument that David's presenting? And also, I just wanted to ask, as someone who obviously approaches things from a more conservative approach, whether conservation is sort of a priority on that side of the spectrum among those who believe in sort of free market solutions and oppose cap and trade. Is conservation even on the horizon, or is it more about let's keep consuming as much as we can, and what's the way to achieve that?
Sure. I'll hopefully answer both questions throughout my answer here. The point about, is it a priority? I obviously can't speak for members of Congress about what they're doing on the right or left, the people who are actually going to be making the laws going forward. I will agree with David, though, that that energy efficiency is low-hanging fruit. It's the easiest way to go about doing this, and it's something that every individual can do by themselves, absent government telling them to do it, a regulator putting some sort of fine on not doing it. A lot of people do a lot of different things every day to promote energy efficiency. My problem with the way this debate always ends up is we want energy efficiency, so how can the government mandate that? And that's a problem for multiple reasons. I'll give you an example. Let's say the government says want to promote energy efficiency through houses by putting in new energy efficient windows. Now, when the government creates a new regulation like this, even though they have the best intentions, there's going to have to be X, Y, and Z line that has to be complied with for every window that's going to be a quote unquote energy efficient window. So if someone else develops something that's even better, it may not comply with that mandate, and yet it's a better technology and would save us more. So I think the energy efficiency argument, it has to come bottom up rather than top down. One of the things that I get in my monthly utility bill is a list of ways to save energy. It's really easy. It doesn't cost me a dime usually. Sometimes it might cost you a little bit more with a different light bulb, or turning your air conditioner off when you go to work or something like that. But there's all these different ways for people to be energy efficient without having the government tell you things which are going to create more and more inefficiency actually at the end of the day. So energy efficiency, I'll agree. It is the Swiss Army knife, as David said. I think that's a great way to put it. It is low-hanging fruit. It's that it's best done from the bottom up.
Marcus, if we have time, I
take an audience question.
Okay.
Yeah. Dave,
I think that's worth rebutting at least briefly. If you look at
sure,
first of all,
you can keep it brief. Sure.
Okay, it's a false dichotomy between energy efficiency efforts being entirely voluntary, which
you broke up for a second, Dave.
I say. It's a false dichotomy to say the choices between voluntary energy efficiency efforts, which are manifestly not capturing the energy efficiency available, as every person who studied this will tell you, and sort of top-down mandates for specific technologies. There's a whole range of policies in between there which could encourage energy efficiency, and there's a lot more to energy efficiency than just consumer choices. There's efficiency in factories, there's efficiency in power plants, there's efficiency in energy transmission. So energy efficiency is a much, much larger source of energy than I think Steve would have you. Steve is implying here.
Steve, you have a quick 30-second rule?
Well, sure. I don't disagree that it's a big a big issue to tackle, and that there is a role. I'm not going to sit here and say that the government has no role in America's energy future. Quite the contrary. I'm not against funding different types of energy, whether they're renewables or innovative technologies with fossil fuels. I'm not against having a government role in this kind of thing, but it is a question of cost, and it is a question of priorities.
Which is, can limiting cap and trade of the large fossil energy companies help advance clean technologies? We had touched on some of this before, but not in this specific question.
Who's that for, Marcus?
Steve, how about you address that?
Well, I think cap and trade was always about targeting large fossil fuel companies. It was always about targeting the most efficient, the most affordable energy sources, so they could raise prices, so renewables would somehow be on par with them. And if you look at a lot of the energy innovation in these so-called green energy or renewables, they're coming from a lot of the traditional energy sources. Whether it's I know it's a bad word, but BP's funding some of this stuff. Shell is funding a lot of renewable energy efforts. A lot of these big companies that would be penalized just for existing under a cap and trade system are the ones that are also investing a lot of money into a lot of these clean technologies. And I think the issue also ignores the key point, which is what I made earlier, is that the businesses that are largely lobbying for cap and trade, and David actually made a pretty good point about this too, is that companies come to the government rent-seeking. They want some sort of slice of the pie, and that's what you see with emissions allowances that are given out to favored industries that get on board. That's their prize for kissing the ring of government. The idea that it's going to advance clean technologies, I actually doubt it, because I think it's going to weaken the economy, so people are going to want to invest even more in the affordable and available technologies that are proven, rather than investing in something risky that doesn't have a good rate of return.
Okay, David?
It's sort of an academic question, since I think we can all agree that cap and trade of any kind is dead for for the foreseeable future. But Steve is right. It was always
Hear,
about
hear.
it was all, it was always about targeting the largest emitters. But just a couple of things in responses. If you look at conservatives and Republicans in practice, not in rhetoric, but in practice, you'll find that they don't object to rent seeking. They don't object to companies coming to DC and asking for favors. They don't object to an energy policy that's built around political favoritism. What they object to is new forms of energy and new industries trying to muscle in on some of the action. Right now, we have a system that's where fossil fuels are getting those rents. They've got rents and rules rigged in their favor and a whole network of subsidies that have been built over the last century. And what conservatives are trying to do is protect those advantages, not serve a free market, not create a free market. They're trying to protect big energy incumbents. And that's why big energy incumbents shower conservative think tanks and conservative politicians with money, because they know full well what the arrangement is. They use free market rhetoric, but they protect the advantages of fossil fuel industries. That's the scam that's going on right now.
Steve, just to reply to that, is it a scam? What's happening there, as David describes it?
Well, I just think it's interesting that the proposed solution to this problem, largely from the left, is creating another skewed market, this time for the less efficient and more expensive energy sources. I mean, you're replacing one problem with potentially a bigger problem. This is what renewable energy mandates do. This is what cap and trade does. All of these companies have come to the government trying to carve out their own, manufactured market that doesn't benefit consumers. It just benefits their bottom line. So, let's have an honest conversation about whether we're ever going to really have a free market in energy. I don't think we ever really will. David talks about a lot of vested interests in this. Those are certainly there. But as long as the government has an interest in America's energy policy, which I think is necessary, I think there is a proper role for government in that, we're never going to have a true free market. So it's a question of what kind of energy sources do we want? Do we want affordable ones, or do we want expensive, inefficient ones? And if we're going to invest in new technology, let's invest in those new technology, but let's not deceive ourselves into making believe that they're more affordable than they actually are.
Marcus, can I just do a quick 30-second follow-up?
Sure.
One sentence. The reason
No problem.
that the energy costs as reflected in the market are as much a cultural artifact as they are any sort of objective property of technology. The reason fossil fuel costs appear low is that they externalize their extraordinary health impacts, they externalize their pollution costs, they externalize the cost to America of fighting wars to defend them. They externalize the vast bulk of their costs. That's what they've spent the last century doing, is figuring out ways of capturing their benefits and externalizing their costs. And so now we end up with a situation where they appear cheap, but they're only cheap because their costs are being paid through healthcare costs, through environmental remediation, through military costs. And if all those actual costs of fossil fuels were gathered up and put in the price of fossil fuels, you better believe that renewable fuels would already be at parity in many situations and in many regions of the country, and that's only accelerating.
All right, I'm looking globally. The next question here, which I'll pop up there, is as developing nations become more industrialized, and you see it obviously happening with China and India, what international role should the U.S. take on energy? Dave, how about you answer that one?
Well, the best international role we could take, well, I mean, obviously what I'd like to see internationally is a carbon trading system that is eventually global. Clearly that goal has receded into the distance. but the other thing we can do is support China's extraordinary efforts right now to accelerate the energy efficiency of its economy, support its efforts to build out renewable energy, do everything we can to share innovations that we come up with China, and encourage them to share their innovations with us. So I really think that copyright law and property law is a under-discussed aspect of all this. And two, the other thing we can do, I mean, the best thing we can do is take what we learn about how to operate in a low carbon, high efficiency way and share those things with China as aggressively as possible and support China's efforts to drive down the cost of these things through its advantages, which tend to be related to scale. And that's what it's doing right now. So I think the best thing we can do internationally is try to get over some of these suspicions and break through some of these parochial concerns that some industries have about sharing their technology and their innovations, and try the best we can to share information and innovation to the extent possible.
Steve, what do you feel about that?
Well, sharing innovation and sharing the technology that we have through global trade, lowering trade barriers, I think that's a wonderful thing, and it certainly is going to promote what we actually need more than anything to help our energy future, to help anything that we want with our economy, and that's promoting economic growth. Now, one of the things about industrializing countries, rapidly industrializing countries like China and India, they're using a lot of coal. They're using some of them are using natural gas. They're using these energy sources because they're affordable, because the number one goal they have is what our number one goal should be, which is economic growth. And we should encourage that, because the richer they become, the more wealth they have, the better they can actually protect their environment. They're never going to get there if you put a cap on economic growth through whether it's an international trading system, which I agree with David is probably dead, or telling them what energy they can or can't use. We need to encourage them to produce their own energy, use energy, become a strong economy. And the more we can do that, the more we can encourage that, the better they're going to be. The Obama administration wanted to cut Export-Import Bank loan for for some coal plant technology in India. It was going to be the technology.
Steve, you cut out for a second. Sorry, Steve, you cut out for a second. You were saying the Obama administration wanted to. Repeat that.
It tried to cut. The Obama administration tried to cut a loan through the Export-Import Bank to India for technology that would be built in Wisconsin. It was a coal plant in India. The Obama administration rejected it, which was threatening about 1,000 jobs in Wisconsin, because the coal plant in India didn't adhere to the Obama administration's broader green agenda. It took a liberal U.S. senator from Wisconsin and, at the time, a Democratic governor of Wisconsin to come and say this is ridiculous. And they finally moved forward with it and said if India will start doing some other anti-global warming measures, we'll actually go forward with the loan. But we need to be encouraging these kinds of projects because they create U.S. jobs, they make India wealthier, and when we have all these countries that are wealthier, we're going to get better environmental protection. The worst polluters around the world, the countries with the worst environmental track record, are also the poorest, and there's a reason for that.
Marcus, can I respond real quick?
Dave, you have any? Sure, I was just going to ask you. If, both of you have obviously a big issue, so I wanted to get both of you to rebut each other, and hopefully without too much blood on our hands.
Okay, just a couple of quick points about economic growth. First, I think Steve is half right about growth. I think it's absolutely true that developing economies like China and India need growth, and China has actually pulled millions and millions of people out of poverty over the last 10 or 20 years. It's been one of the most extraordinary increases in net human welfare in history. So I think that Greens should not pretend that they can stop that, or that they should try to stop that. But the other side of the coin is if China and India grow along the path on which they are currently growing, they are going to be choked with smog. They are going to run out of oil. They're going to start running out of coal. The path they're on is sort of a catch-22. They need growth, but on the other hand, the path of growth they're on is leading to certain doom, not just for them, but for the world. I mean, if China brings itself up to parity on a per capita basis to the U.S. along a fossil fuel path, the world is doomed. That's just mathematics. So there's two things we need to do. We need to encourage growth in China and India, yes, but we urgently, imperatively need to decouple that growth from growth in carbon emissions, from growth in fossil fuels. the entire world, but especially China and India, needs to figure out a model that accommodates growth, that accommodates increase in personal welfare and personal income without a growth of fossil fuel use and carbon emissions. And that is the key overriding energy imperative for us and for China.
Steve, you have a quick
and I'd argue
response
just
to that?
Yeah, just really quick. A lot of these green initiatives sound great, and I'm not going to dispute that we need to have cleaner energy and we need all these new technologies. But when you're looking at India, you're looking at China, you're looking at millions and millions, hundreds of millions of people who don't even have electricity. Telling them that they have to suddenly start using solar panels and windmills rather than a coal plant which will actually provide them electricity, it's a very, very tough sell. And this is why India has rejected a lot of the global climate pacts. It's why China will reject it. It says it's not, but I trust them just like I trust them when they say they're protecting human rights. This whole situation needs to emphasize economic growth. I don't disagree with everything David said, but it's just a tough sell when a large portion of your population doesn't even have basic necessities.
How about we agree to spend as much money on clean energy and energy efficiency as China is? That way, their sensible take on this, we can replicate it.
Well, look, I think a lot of the spending that we do in this country is probably misguided when it comes to clean energy. One of the reasons why China spends so much money on clean energy, like windmills and solar panels and all of that, is because they actually have a lot of the rare materials naturally occurring in their country. So if we want to emulate that, we're going to have to displace our reliance on oil imports from terrorist countries to imports from China, because we're going to be getting the rare materials from them anyway. So, and the other point I would say is it's easy for a country that's a communist dictatorship to just say something has to happen. This is a big reason Thomas Friedman loves China, because they can just snap their fingers and something happens. They don't rely on costs. They don't worry about all that. They just do it. The United States, we actually try to have a legitimate economic argument about what are the costs and what are the benefits, rather than just accepting whatever the government tells us.
Marcus, let's imagine ourselves 50 years in the future. Let's imagine ourselves 50 years in the future, looking back. Who's going to be happier? China, who laid down this extraordinary amount of low-carbon infrastructure and has been benefiting from it ever since, or us, who nickel and dimed infrastructure costs, nickel and dimed new energy costs, and is now woefully behind in the new energy markets that are dominating the global market, and our infrastructure is crumbling, and we no longer have the resources even to catch up with China. I think if you look 50 years out, the people who were looking long-term for their investments, the country that was looking about their long-term health and long-term growth, like the U.S. used to do, is going to be the country that was happier with their decisions. But we should move on.
Well, this
China's also
we have one final question, and actually you guys can touch on this because it does tap into this the gist of this question. I mean, it's sort of an open-ended question, but it takes in obviously our energy policy and the other examples around the world, including China. Basically, what is the greatest energy challenge America faces, and how do we confront it? So, Dave, let's start with you.
Well, I said this before, and it's worth repeating. The energy challenge that the U.S. faces is ultimately the same energy challenge that the world faces, which is how to accommodate economic growth without growth in carbon emissions. In fact, with a dramatic shrinking of carbon emissions. We have to decouple growth from the consumption of finite resources. This is humanity's challenge. It's not even an energy challenge. It's not even a U.S. challenge. That is humanity's challenge, how to accommodate our vast numbers and our vast appetites on a globe that has finite resources. So that's the overarching challenge. As to how to attack it, I think we have to get over the idea, and I think carbon pricing proponents, cap and trade proponents, were as guilty of this as anybody else. We have to get over the idea that we're going to tackle it in one fell, dramatic swoop, that we're going to pass one gigantic bill and suddenly we'll be on a new trajectory and everything will be taken care of. What we're going to have to do is something like guerrilla warfare. We're going to have to work at the city level and the state level and the national level and the international level. We're going to have to do efficiency. We're going to have to dramatically scale up deployment of renewables. We're going to have to eventually put a price on carbon and start wrenching some of these subsidies back from dirty fuels. We're going to have we're going to have to start making our cities more walkable, more dense, more served by public transit. We're going to have to build out high-speed rail. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of ways. We've spent a century constructing a society and a culture around cheap fossil fuels. And if we're going to build a new society and a new culture built around efficiency and low carbon fuels, it's going to require an entire new infrastructure. And that is going to be the work of a bill or a particular policy. It's going to be something, an all hands on deck effort that's going to be going on for our lifetimes at least.
Steve, how do you address that sort of very, very broad question?
Well, ironically enough, I'd actually make it even bigger. I think that there's just a huge challenge that America faces, and it has to do with economic growth. David touched upon this, and I'm not going to sit up here and argue that all economic growth has to happen regardless of environmental consequences. We all value a clean environment. We all value, not recklessly destroying what are our natural resources. But the number one focus has to be economic growth. I'll come back to this over and over again, and it's a point that a lot of people, whether it's the Obama administration or whoever, they don't get it. They say we want clean energy jobs, we want economic growth, but we also want energy taxes. We want new jobs to spring up, but we also want to impose all these new regulations on you over the course of 50 or 100 years. They're not compatible. We can have economic growth while protecting the environment, and we all support that. But we need to focus on the economic growth part, because with economic growth we get environmental protection. It's a long record of the past few decades. Look at what the coal industry has done with a new plant built today. If we could ever build one, we need some litigation reform to actually get that forward, versus one that was built 30 or 40 years ago. We have the capability in America, as the greatest entrepreneurs, to use economic growth as a vehicle for protecting the environment and getting new technologies, innovating in a way 20, 30 years from now that we'll never even know about. Who predicted? Did the government predict Google would happen? Did the government did they predict that cell phones would come about? Did they know the exact date that the Wright brothers would fly the first airplane? Innovation comes from American entrepreneurs, not from the government, not from bureaucrats in Washington telling us what we can and can't do. And as long as we encourage that, we're going to be a stronger economy, we're going to be more prosperous, and we are going to get commensurate environmental protection with that.
Marcus, you got to let me jump in here.
Yes. No, sure. Well,
a couple of things.
I knew that last part you'd be it would get your.
I felt so good about that.
All right, so we'll keep it brief. 30 seconds, Dave. So.
Okay, it's ironic that Steve chooses those particular examples, because internet technology grew out of decades of government investment. The airlines' growth and health grew out of decades of government investment. Telecom, the telecom industry grew out of decades of government investment. The history in America of new competitive industries almost always traces back to government investment. So the idea that entrepreneurs do this on their own is absurd. And just real quickly, I know that conservatives love to sort of say we have growth on one hand, and then, when we can, it's nice to protect the plants and trees and the critters, the environment. That is a false dichotomy. If we keep spewing carbon in the air, the droughts that come with that, the floods that come with that, the wildfires that come with that, the severe storms that come with that, the spread of disease, those aren't hurting critters and trees, those are hurting us. Those are going to inhibit our growth. They're going to inhibit our flourishing. This is not about us versus the environment. We live in the damn environment, and if the environment is not healthy, neither are we. So we've got to find a way of growing without growing carbon emissions. That is what I'll return to over and over again.
Well, Steve, I'll
point out that
false. No, I just wanted to say, is that sort of a dichotomy that can't be as David mentioned, that can't be sustained?
No, as I've said, government has a role in America's energy future. I will continue to say that. It's perfectly consistent for me to say that. Google was perhaps the wrong example because I forgot that Al Gore created the internet. The point I was making is that
I thought it was the
no one
Pentagon that invented the internet. Isn't it the
no one
military
ever
that invented the internet?
The
no
government
one ever
invented it.
foresaw though. No one ever foresaw that Al Gore was in the government, right? No one ever foresaw what kind of impact Google would have. They saw it was a search engine. All of a sudden, it is on our cell phones. It is this ubiquitous technology and company all around us that we use every day in our lives. And no one ever predicted that. You couldn't have mandated that into existence. The point that I'm making is that if we start telling entrepreneurs what they can and can't do, we're not going to get the best results. We're going to get results that maybe are predictable. The subsidies that we've poured into wind and solar for the past decades certainly haven't achieved anything beyond. Certainly haven't achieved what we wanted to achieve in that sense. They're still combined less than 10% of our energy. But you have to promote economic growth first and foremost, and if the American economy is strong, we're going to reach towards those goals. It's a fundamental disagreement between me and David, I guess.
Yeah. Well, on that note, let's wrap it up. Thank you so much, both of you guys, Steve and Dave. Very entertaining, very stimulating, and viewers learned a lot. So let's all pile into our Cadillac Escalades and speed home. But
hybrids, right?
Also, I wanted to, yeah, exactly, hybrid Escalade, of course.
I'm on a Segway.
Now, I just wanted to mention that very briefly that our next debate. Be sure to join us again next Tuesday, November 16th, at same time, same bat channel, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, when Stuart Brand and Eric Picha debate nuclear energy. So please tune in for that. And David and Steve, thanks a lot. And
thanks, Steve. Thanks, Marcus.
Take care. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.